So, welcome to something different today. I try to explain a little bit about my project RandomDD. Maybe you saw the other videos I already did that were mostly taken out of the stream and at best just cut a little bit where I had some breaks or something like that. But no, I decided to give you a small overview over the project and yeah, why things are like they are. So let's first quickly just um, show you what's in my cargo file. And as you can see, it's really small. It just depends on Bevy with a file watcher, dynamic linking, and rough. File watcher was just a test from my side. I didn't really use it much yet because in most cases it's not the assets I want to hot reload, it would be more the logic. But currently Bevy, as far as I know, does not support hot reloading of actual code. It only supports hot reloading of assets. And then dynamic linking just to reduce the build times during development. I would actually recommend doing that, at least for development. During release, I guess I will disable that flag, but yeah, for now I will leave it enabled. The Bevy DevTools is just more like when I tried to figuring out how the picking works, the picking tool in Bevy. The DevTools were really helpful to show me, hey, which entity is currently under my cursor. So I can actually recommend that, and then ran just to have some randomness. Yeah, but else I really try to have as few possible dependencies as possible, simply because yeah, I try to learn Bevy, and I don't want to have finished products delivered to me and I just use them, because then I don't learn anything. I learn to use those products, and then that's not what I want. I want to really understand how I can get things done within of Bevy. So let's go in now. Let's take a quick look at my main file. Yeah, I'm actually have here prelude star, but yeah, I have a lot of dependency here on top where I'm say, hey, use that. But in the end, the main file more or less is just responsible for creating the app from Bevy. And if you don't know Bevy at all, then I really would recommend to stop now and go learn Bevy from the websites. This video is more like, hey, you have a very basic understanding of Bevy, maybe even try it a little bit, but then you were stuck or you didn't really know how to continue at some points. And that's where I was as well, more or less, and that's why I'm doing that, because yeah, you can do quite fast a few things like writing a simple system and that's working, and spawning your first sprite, and that's everything is fine and well, but connecting stuff together and doing it in a way that makes actually sense at some point, that's I found kind of hard in Bevy initially. And that's more or less what I'm trying to do in this video, to give a heads up, hey, in which direction you maybe should inform yourself, how do things work. So, and yeah, one part of that is actually already here. And that is actually using game state with specific schedulers and system sets. So what are those? So from Bevy's point of view, you have here you can define a game state, which I'm actually not sure if it could be a struct as well, but in the end, actually I don't think struct would make sense. So I have this game state enum, and it defines the default state, and then you can more or less derive here the states derived from Bevy. and then you have this, I'm not entirely sure if all the other derives I have here are really necessary for the states to work, but yeah, once you have that, and you can use them, for example, to define when something should run. For example, I'm saying here, hey, my during wave should only run if I'm in the state, game state wave. Or, yeah, but what is this during wave? And that's where I said, hey, system sets are interesting as well. And more or less, you define a system set just, as I mentioned, once again, as a struct in this case, and then you can derive the system set. And here, I'm quite sure you need to derive all of that as a debug, clone, copy, hash, partial, EQ, and EQ. I'm actually not sure about copy. Let's quickly test that. Okay, no, but I do believe, since the struct doesn't even have any kind of content, deriving copy makes sense in that case. It's in my head even smaller than U64 or something like that. So hey, why not make it copy as well? So, and yeah, then yeah, what does all of that mean here? I will not go too much into details because I just want you to point you in the right direction. And if you really want to know more, then leave a comment and I will try to create a more in-depth video about a specific thing. But for now, I will just try to give an overview what things should you know in Bevy to get to a point where things start to feel really good. And that's actually where I'm kind of currently where I'm thinking, hey, if you use those things together, it really makes sense. So yeah, as I said, I have now here my system sets defined, or a different kind of system set, and defined when they should run. And then you can, for example, if you add a system, define, hey, please run all those systems in a specific set. So, for example, spawning of my enemies, or even shooting of my towers, that should only be used when I'm actually in a wave. So I have here the spawn enemy, update timers, which more or less then updates my towers to shoot and stuff like that, will only run during my wave. And outside of that state, it will not run. And that's exactly what I want in most cases. I'm still quite sure that I will need to improve this here a little bit, because as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And at some point, I'll try to make it more, yeah, I will look into it if I can abstract it a little bit better and make it easier to understand, because currently I do believe it's kind of, if you are fresh, new to the code base here, you would go in here and you would see this wall of text, then you would just think, oh, holy crap, what's going on here? And that's not what I like. I really am a fan of, how do I say it? Code should be, as I'm not saying easy to understand, but it shouldn't overwhelm you. So if that's possible, then, or if you don't get this feeling of, oh, I'm overwhelmed, there's so much going on in this one function, for example, then you do something right. If you get this feeling, and I'm currently get this feeling even myself if I look at this function, then I do believe that you need to somehow try to update that code to make it a little bit better understandable, if possible at all. But I do believe writing code that looks simple is one of the hardest skills you can get in programming. Making something work is kind of easy, in my opinion, but making it actually feel, also how much feeling really should be part of your opinion about code. That's the other thing in my head. But I do believe if you look at code and hey, you think, hey, that's nice, that would be really, really great. So yeah, where was I? Right, exactly. That's one thing you should look into it. How do system sets work? Schedules itself. I haven't done that myself yet, but I saw that you can define your own schedules. So maybe that would make actually sense as well at some point out to make all of what I did here a little bit more concise, but yeah, for now, I'm already quite happy with just the systems and system sets and game state, but maybe in the future I actually will look into schedules as well once I try to, yeah, make all the stuff here a little bit better readable. So, the other thing I really do believe is you should look into if you want to try to learn Bevy and understand Bevy is events. So, for example, I have here this, actually, is that the right event I want to show you? Let's go with the gold gained event. So how does it look like? Where did I define it? Here I did define it. So it's like most things in Bevy, I would say, is defining something is kind of easy. So you go in, and I have here now, yeah, you write your struct, gold gained, and I have here this amount, how much gold should whoever listening to that event should gain, and then you can just derive event. If you want propagation and stuff like this, you can even go and say, hey, please use event auto-propagate if more than one sources will listen to that. Then it might make sense. And yeah, so I have here now defined my event. Where can I use that? And I more or less do that currently only when an enemy gets hit. That's another event handler, let's say it like that, because here I have this damage taken event. My enemy gets hit, and when my enemy has less health than 0, then I spawn it, and then more or less I trigger here this gold gained event. I could, for example, in the future trigger here another one. Instead of despawning it, I could now trigger here, for example, hey, death animation or something like that. And then, yeah, the despawning would come later, but the player would already have the money. Or maybe other way around, I would just trigger here the death animation, and at the end of the death animation, I would only trigger the gold gained event. But how you do it is at the end of the day then your choice, but that you have this flexibility that I just mentioned. And for example, you could just write different systems that don't know about each other, and you can trigger them how you want them to. And that's the beauty of the event, in my opinion, that you can more or less decouple your logic. And that's what I'm doing here, more or less. The enemy doesn't need to know that he that there's a player or anything about the player. He can just know, say, hey, I'm dead, and whoever is interested can get that gold. In the future, you could maybe even abstract it even further away, that you just say, hey, an enemy has died with that type, and then on another place you look up, hey, if an enemy with that type dies, then you get so and so much money, and then trigger another event. But there I would be at some point a little bit, because one drawback that events have and decoupling of code like this is that at some point, if you have too much abstraction and too much decoupling, then it gets kind of hard to actually know what's happening. So, and I haven't found yet a tool that really visualizes that in Bevy. Maybe there are some, which could help tremendous amounts, because I am a believer in, how do I say it, in observability, and that what you usually want. You want that you can observe what your code is doing, and events are usually a little bit counterproductive to that. Also the best example is if you just have a sequence on things you need to do, and you can write them just down in one function, then you can look at it and you can immediately understand what's happening. If you now, for example, look at this code here, then we understand, okay, I get something out of my query, and if I don't find it, I return. Hey, if then I subtract something from my age here, from my health, and then I do something else, more or less, quite simply said. Now, if I, for example, I would implement, add here another event, for example, hey, I would say it, let's just say it, enemy died, and all of this would be somewhere else. Maybe that's actually a bad example. Maybe I have something where I have a little bit more code. Maybe here, so for example, here I go through all the enemies, and then I trigger here player hit, and that's already, hey, you don't really know what's happening here. Yeah, player hit, who will listen to it? In this case, it's not really relevant. And that's why I use the event here, but maybe it's for example, I would go down here and say, hey, enemy moved, and would just trigger here an event that would tell me, okay, an enemy should move in that direction, but I wouldn't know how did I implement that. I could do that. That doesn't really make sense in this case, because it's already in this update enemy method. So that's the point. I'm not sure if I really got it over now, but too many events will make the code not readable anymore. So in my opinion, you need to try to find a balance between when to trigger an event and when just to read down the code in a normal function. So, and yeah, so, but let's get back to the observers and triggers. Where was I? Exactly, so that's how you define events, but how do you listen and make those function I just showed you? And there are two ways, actually I do believe there are more than just the two ways, but the two ways I'm currently using is more or less, I would call it a global event handler, which you can just add via the add observer function. And if you go now in here, it's more or less that for all gold gained events that are triggered somewhere within the in my game loop, this would be triggered. And yeah, and here more or less I just look up my player and add the goal to the player. And that's more or less it. But there are other, for example, if we go now to our tower, base tower, and here more or less I add, I spawn an entity. So it's my tower with a range and it has a radius, which is a collider, but that doesn't really matter here right now. And then I more or less just say, hey, please observe if you get covered with the mouse, or if enemies are in your range, or when a certain time elapsed. I'm just saying, hey, please, this entity should observe those events. And then we can do stuff like, how is probably kind of bad. Enemies in range is maybe better. So more or less my collision system can now go in and can trigger for each entity if it has a collision. And then I can listen to that event with this trigger collision here. And then I can query my enemies. And then more or less I can, hey, and more or less what I'm doing here is, if is in those collisions an enemy within range of my tower, then great. Let's start my timer for shooting and shoot at the target. And if not, then please remove my timer and remove my target. And yeah, that's it. So until an enemy is in range, we more or less don't have this. We have no cooldown for the timer, because I don't want to have more or less fixed intervals when I shoot. I more or less want to have each tower has its own timer, and that's what I'm achieving here with that. And that timer more or less then triggers this on time elapsed method and tells my tower to shoot, because that timed object is attached to the tower. So the tower then can observe this event here, and as soon as it gets that event, it can more or less try to shoot at the enemy it still knows, hopefully. And if it does not know the enemy, or it doesn't find the enemy, it can more or less remove its tower target, and the next time it would get a new tower target in that method. That's how I more or less implemented it. I'm not entirely sure if we could do it better. Probably yes, because there's always something you can do better, in my opinion. But for now, that's a quite of easy way to for me to abstract away yeah, those informations. And especially I don't need to write systems that iterate over all the towers and do stuff. I just get, hey, that specific tower does that specific thing. And that helped me really well to implement logic, because usually it makes it even easier. At least in my opinion. But feel free to disagree with me and then let me know what you would do differently, and maybe actually I will look into it and can do that. But for now, I found this way to do things kind of good, because it reduces the amount of load in my brain, if that makes sense to you. I hope. And that's more or less already it. I think I told you about yeah, more or less everything I found interesting, let's say it like that. And hopefully it helps you in your own future in deciding, hey, what to look into. Because that's actually really are things that I knew they were there, but I wasn't sure at the end of the day, do I need them? Should I do it differently? And at the end of the day, I always try to implement everything with a system. But now I would really say I leveled up my Bevy skills with first the system sets and run conditions. And actually, maybe I should mention that a lot of run conditions for those systems are already provided by Bevy, so before you implement your own, just look up. Maybe Bevy already has something that is interesting to you. And yeah, last but not least, the observers and the triggers are really, really nice way to respond to specific events. And that's exactly what they're meant to do. So look into them if it helps you. Really, really nice. Hope to see you around. And yeah, have a nice day. Bye.